Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I first noticed the scratch marks on her phone bills while sorting through the documents on the kitchen counter. They were faint, almost like someone had run a key lightly over the paper in a distracted moment. But as I looked closer, I realized they weren't random scratches. They were covering up specific words, dates, and numbers. Each mark had been carefully placed to obscure something very intentional. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. Maybe she had been doodling while talking on the phone or absent-mindedly dragging her pen across the paper. But as I began to lift the top sheet and compare it with the next, I saw a pattern forming. The scratches only appeared over specific entries, and those entries repeated the same format across several months. They all referenced transactions labeled as babysitting fees. Some had times and dates beside them, others included short location markers. What sent a chill down my spine was how familiar those details were. They matched days and hours I was supposed to be out of town or working late shifts. I never requested babysitting. I never asked for help watching anyone or anything. In fact, there was no child in our household to babysit. So who was being watched, and why were those charges showing up on her phone bill? My partner's wife was careful about details, so this wasn't a careless mistake. As the weeks passed, the entries kept showing up. Sometimes the scratches were more aggressive, as if made in a moment of panic. Other times they were subtle, almost an afterthought. I started quietly photographing each bill before it disappeared or was shredded. It felt wrong, but I needed to understand what I was looking at. I did not want to jump to conclusions, so I began tracking where I was on the dates listed. I checked calendar entries, credit card statements, even gas receipts. The strange thing was that everything lined up on my end. I really was where I was supposed to be. But that made the babysitting entries more suspicious, not less. One Tuesday afternoon, while alone in the living room, I pulled out a manila envelope I had hidden behind a bookshelf. Inside were all the photos and notes I had compiled. I lined them up on the coffee table, tapping my pen anxiously as I studied them. The amounts varied, but the timing never did. They always occurred in the late afternoon, between 3 and 6 p.m. I started feeling sick as a theory formed in my mind. What if those charges were not about babysitting someone else's child, but about watching someone specific? What if I was the one being babysat? Or worse, monitored? It seemed ridiculous, paranoid even. But every scratched line whispered that something was being kept from me. I finally decided to ask directly. Not about the phone bills, but about those afternoons. I framed it casually, pretending I was reminiscing. I asked if anything strange had happened around that time, if there were errands I had forgotten. My partner looked at me blankly and said no, then asked why I was suddenly curious. I mumbled something about reorganizing files and laughed it off, but inside, everything was tightening. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep and checked the trash outside. Tucked between a grocery flyer and an empty paper towel roll was another bill, torn in half, but still legible. The same scratches, same fees. I drove to a print shop the next morning and had the photocopies printed on thicker paper. I needed something real in my hands. I knew I couldn't show them yet, but I needed to feel like I had control. Back home, I hid them under the mattress. It was all I could do to keep myself from confronting someone, anyone. Then something changed. The entry stopped. No more scratches, no more fees. For 3 weeks the bills were clean. I almost let myself believe it had been a strange phase, a coincidence. But then a different detail caught my eye. A contact saved under a fake name started showing up repeatedly on her call log. It was an odd alias, something generic like admin office, but the number didn't belong to any business I could find. I called it once from a payphone, and the line picked up, but no one said anything. Just the sound of breathing, faint and steady. I hung up after 7 seconds and walked away trembling. Later that week, I found a receipt in the laundry. It was crumpled and faded, but the total matched one of the old babysitting fees. Except this time it was labeled differently. Surveillance Service, 3HRS. My hands went cold. There was no denying it anymore. I had been watched, observed, recorded without my knowledge. I began thinking about all the times I had come home to things being slightly out of place. A glass moved, a drawer slightly ajar. I had dismissed them as signs of my own absent-mindedness. But now I knew better. Someone had been in my home while I was gone, or worse, while I was there. One night, while pretending to sleep, I left the door to the study slightly open. I heard her walk in around 11 p.m. Her footsteps paused by the desk, followed by the soft clicking of the file cabinet drawer. I stayed still, heart pounding, waiting until she left. The next morning I checked. The photos were gone. I did not confront her. Not yet. I needed a plan, proof that could not be erased. I backed up all files to a secure cloud account and hid a voice-activated recorder in the study. For days, nothing happened. Then one afternoon, while I was supposedly out for errands, I captured something. She was on the phone, speaking softly. She said my name, then paused. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "He's starting to suspect, but it's fine." They told me to keep him calm. My blood ran cold. Who were they? Why was she reporting to anyone about me? The next day, I received a letter in the mail. It was typed, unsigned. Just a simple sentence. "Thank you for your cooperation." That was it. No return address. No indication of who sent it. I stared at it for hours, trying to decide whether to laugh or cry. I decided to leave, quietly, without confrontation. I packed only what I needed and rented a small place on the outskirts of town. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and gave no forwarding address. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, but then it became a gift. Weeks passed before I received another message. This time it was an email from an unknown sender. The subject line was, "You were never meant to see it." Attached was a photo. Me, sitting on the couch, unaware, had taken through the window. The timestamp matched one of the original scratched-out fees. I did not respond. I bought blackout curtains, switched to cash-only transactions, and burned every document I had copied. Whatever game had been played, I was no longer interested in participating. I began living as quietly as possible, far from the world I had once thought I understood. One morning, I received a knock on the door. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. But on the ground lay a flash drive. I hesitated for hours before plugging it into an old laptop I never connected to the internet. The files inside were recordings, video, audio, all from my old home, all of me. There was no narration, no background voice. Just raw footage, spliced and labeled by date. I watched only 30 seconds before ejecting it. I threw the drive into a metal pot and set it on fire in the backyard. The smoke curled up like a question mark into the sky. That was the last sign of them, whoever they were. I have no proof that they ever stopped watching. Only that the evidence stopped arriving. Maybe they knew I was broken enough to be left alone. Maybe that was all they wanted. Or maybe they simply moved on to someone else. Every now and then I still get the urge to check old records, to find scratches where there should be none. But I resist. My life now is small, deliberate, and quiet. There are no hidden fees, no whispered reports. Only silence. And in that silence I finally found peace. Story 2. I was sorting through boxes in my closet one boring afternoon when I stumbled upon a small envelope tucked behind a pile of winter clothes. At first I thought it was just more junk to throw away. But when I opened it, I saw something strange. It was a bunch of receipts from a local gym. What caught my attention was that the dates went back almost a year and I had no memory of ever joining that gym. The receipts were printed with my full name and some kind of member identification number. Each one showed payment for the same monthly plan. I checked the dates and realized they lined up exactly with the time in my life that I spent mostly indoors, feeling isolated and out of shape. Back then, I had been battling a depressive slump. There was no way I had been to a gym during that time. I sat down on the floor and began flipping through each receipt, half hoping it was just a billing mistake. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. There were even itemized purchases listed: protein shakes, towels, locker rentals. It was as if someone had been going to this gym regularly using my name and account. Curiosity pushed me further, so I dug deeper into the envelope and found a stack of printed photographs underneath the receipts. The first image was a little blurry, showing a person lifting weights in a nearly empty gym. The lighting was low, and the quality of the print was poor, but there was something familiar about the person. My stomach tightened when I flipped to the next photo. In the second picture, the face was clearly visible. It was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. Same haircut, same build, even the same scar on the shoulder I got as a kid. The expression on the face was intense, mid-workout, with sweat dripping down the forehead. I dropped the photo, heart thudding in my chest. My first thought was that maybe someone had digitally altered the images. But these were printed on photo paper, not screenshots or edits. The timestamps were consistent with the receipts. I didn't know what disturbed me more: the possibility that I had blacked out entire chunks of time, or that someone had gone through enormous trouble to impersonate me. I tried recalling every detail from that period in my life. Was it possible I had been working out and simply forgotten? Could it have been some kind of dissociative state? But even in my worst mental fogs, I always remembered the basics, like where I went or what I ate. Working out in a public place several times a week would not have escaped my memory. Shaking, I pulled out my phone and searched the gym's name. It was only a 20-minute drive from where I lived. I had never been there, not even once. I checked my banking app and scanned through old statements. Sure enough, the payments were real. They had been automatically deducted every month from my account. Feeling nauseous, I called the gym and asked to speak with someone about my membership. A woman answered and asked for my member ID, which I read off one of the receipts. She pulled up my account quickly and said I had been a regular visitor up until 2 months ago, According to her, I had last checked in on a Tuesday at 6 p.m. I asked if they had security footage or logs. She hesitated, saying she wasn't authorized to release that information. I insisted, saying I believed someone had been using my identity. She transferred me to a manager, and after a long conversation and a lot of explaining, he agreed to let me come in the next day to review the footage. That night, I barely slept. I kept looking at the photos, trying to find a detail that would confirm this was a trick. But everything matched my posture, the way I tied my shoes, even a small mole on my left hand. It felt like I was looking at a mirror from a life I never lived. The next morning, I went to the gym. The building was modern and clean, filled with people who looked like they belonged there. As I entered, I felt completely out of place. The receptionist looked up and smiled like she recognized me. I forced a smile back, trying to ignore the chill crawling up my spine. The manager led me to a small office and pulled up archived footage on his computer. He skipped through the dates I had mentioned. There on the screen was me walking through the front doors, scanning my card, and heading to the treadmill. He looked at me, confused, then back at the screen. I stared at the video, stunned. It was unmistakably me. Same voice, same gait, even the same nervous habit of rubbing my thumb against my palm. But I had no memory of ever doing any of it. The manager played another video, this one from a locker room camera, showing me putting my gym bag into a locker and changing into workout gear. I asked if he had audio recordings, but he shook his head. I left the gym dazed and went straight to my doctor. I told her everything, and she scheduled a series of evaluations. Over the next week, I underwent cognitive tests, neurological scans, and psychiatric interviews. Everything came back normal. One of the psychiatrists suggested the possibility of dissociative identity disorder, but my behavior and history didn't match the criteria. Another said it could be a form of fugue state brought on by trauma or stress, but again, there were no clear triggers. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I started obsessing over every detail in the photos and videos. I went back to the gym multiple times trying to jog my memory. Nothing came back. I tried recognizing the faces of the staff and regulars, hoping someone might say something that would explain all this. They all just smiled and greeted me like any other day. One evening, while going through old emails, I found a confirmation message from the gym dated over a year ago. It included a welcome video and instructions for setting up the app. I clicked on the link, and to my shock, the video auto-played a short clip of me introducing myself to the camera. It was part of a member profile feature. I was smiling, energetic, and saying how I looked forward to starting over. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen. My voice sounded like me, my expressions were mine, but I had no memory of that moment. I searched the sender's email and traced it to the official gym address. It was legitimate. I had clearly signed up, recorded the video, and paid for everything myself. But how had I done all that without remembering? I decided to speak with a neurologist independently. He asked detailed questions and reviewed my scans. In the end, he said he saw nothing alarming, but added that memory gaps can sometimes be more psychological than physical. I began considering that I might have created another version of myself, one that was stronger, more disciplined, and able to function when the rest of me couldn't. A version that quietly did what I could not. It was a frightening and humbling thought. If that was true, what else had that version of me done? Over time, I began filling in the blanks, not with memories but with acceptance. I began working out again, this time consciously. I visited the gym regularly, trying to recreate some of the photos I had found. Slowly, I made peace with the idea that a part of me had tried to help, even if I couldn't remember it. Now, when I look at those photos, I do not feel fear. I feel something closer to gratitude. Whoever that version of me was, they had not given up. They had dragged me, unknowingly, out of a dark place. Maybe I was not meant to remember everything, but maybe it was enough just to move forward. I kept the receipts and photos in a folder, tucked away in a drawer. Not as evidence, but as a reminder. A reminder that even when I felt like I had disappeared, some part of me stayed. Strong, silent, and unwilling to let go. And that was enough to begin again. Story 3. I woke to the sound of my spouse whispering. It was quiet but deliberate, and for some reason I felt a chill run through me. I could hear that telltale tone the one people use when they're on a video call, trying to stay discreet. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but the voice was real. Then something strange clicked in my mind. Their phone was in the drawer beside the bed. I remembered clearly because I had watched them place it there before we fell asleep. I even heard the drawer slide shut. Yet here they were, whispering as if on a FaceTime call. My heart started to race. I opened my eyes slowly, careful not to draw attention. The room was dim. The only light came from the hallway, casting a faint glow across the floor. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see their silhouette sitting at the edge of the bed. Their mouth moved, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. I held my breath and listened. There was no phone in their hand, no screen glow, no device in sight. Still, they spoke in that same low tone, answering questions, murmuring agreements. I wondered if they were sleep-talking, but something about the rhythm and consistency didn't match that idea. Curiosity won over fear, and I shifted carefully, pretending to stir from sleep. They didn't seem to notice. I watched as their head tilted, as if looking at someone directly in front of them. My stomach turned. If they weren't holding a phone, what were they talking to? I leaned over and opened the drawer. Their phone was there, just as I remembered. The screen was black, and when I tapped it, it showed no recent activity. No missed calls, no notifications. The FaceTime app hadn't been opened. I checked the call log, nothing. Now fully awake, I sat up and looked directly at them. They turned to me slowly, eyes wide like I had caught them mid-crime. But they didn't look guilty, they looked confused. As if they didn't realize I was even there until just that moment. That unsettled me more than anything. I asked them who they were talking to. They blinked, then looked down at their hands like they were just realizing they were empty. No phone, no device, nothing. They said they didn't remember speaking. They said they were probably dreaming. I didn't believe that. The way they were whispering, answering things, it felt intentional. I got out of bed and turned on the light. Their expression shifted into something I couldn't read. It wasn't fear or embarrassment. It was almost disappointment. I asked again, more firmly this time. And they insisted they were asleep. Said maybe I had a bad dream and imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I heard. I knew what I saw. My mind raced for a rational explanation, but none came. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't sleep after that. I lay awake, listening, half expecting them to start whispering again. They didn't, They lay beside me, silent and still. Too still, like they were pretending. The next morning, everything felt normal. They got up, made breakfast, kissed me on the cheek. I watched them like a stranger, trying to detect anything odd. But they were perfectly themselves, or at least the version I thought I knew. I checked the phone again when they were in the shower. Nothing unusual. No hidden apps, no secret messages. It was like the night before had never happened. I began to doubt myself. Maybe I had dreamed it after all. Days passed. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I became more watchful, more suspicious. I started waking up at random hours, pretending to be asleep while watching them. Most nights they just slept peacefully. But then it happened again. This time it was just past 2 a.m. Oh, I heard the whispering. I opened my eyes and saw them sitting up in bed again, looking toward the empty corner of the room. No phone, no screen, just them, nodding and murmuring. My heart pounded in my chest. I sat up sharply and called their name. They jumped, startled. Then, just like before, they seemed confused. Said they didn't remember speaking. I felt like I was going crazy. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. I started recording at night. I used my tablet hidden behind a stack of books on the shelf, camera angled toward the bed. I felt guilty, like I was spying, but I had to know the truth. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then on the 4th night, I caught it. The video showed them sitting up, whispering to the corner of the room, responding, pausing, then answering again. There was no phone, no device, just them. I watched it over and over, chills crawling down my back. I needed answers. I showed them the video the next morning. They stared at it in silence. When it ended, they looked at me and said they had no memory of it. They asked if I thought they needed help. Maybe sleepwalking, or some form of dissociation. I wanted to believe that. We scheduled a sleep study. They were monitored overnight in a clinic. The doctors found nothing unusual, no sleepwalking, no abnormal brain activity. They said everything looked normal. We went home more confused than ever. That night they slept deeply. I stayed up again, just in case. At 3 a.m. I heard it again, not whispering, but breathing. Not theirs. A second set, faint and low, coming from the corner of the room. I sat up slowly. The room was empty, but I felt it. The air was heavier, like it was filled with something invisible and watching. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Nothing was there. No person, no shadow. But I knew something had changed. This wasn't about FaceTime anymore. I told them everything the next morning. I didn't hide it. I told them about the breathing, the heaviness. They didn't laugh. They didn't doubt. They just looked at me with sad eyes and asked if I trusted them. I hesitated, then said I didn't know. We both agreed to take a break. They went to stay with their sibling for a while. I needed time to think. Alone in the house, I expected peace. But the second night alone, I woke to the sound of whispering. This time it was behind me. I turned around, heart racing. No one was there. I got out of bed, turned on every light, searched every room. Empty. But the whispering didn't stop. It was like it was inside the walls, or inside me. I clutched my head and screamed. The sound stopped. Silence fell again. I sat on the floor, shaking. This wasn't about my spouse. This was something else. Something that had latched onto us, or maybe just me. I called them the next morning, told them everything. They were quiet for a long time. Then they said something I hadn't considered. That maybe it started with me. That maybe I was the one whispering first, and they had only responded. I asked what they meant. They said the first time they heard it, they thought I was the one talking. That I was holding a phone and whispering in my sleep. They only joined in because they were scared and didn't want me to be alone. I didn't remember that. Not at all. But the way they said it, with no accusation, just concern, it made me doubt everything again. What if this thing wasn't speaking to us? What if it was speaking through us? We decided to return to the house together. We stayed up that first night, lights on, sitting beside each other. Nothing happened. No whispers, no breathing, just quiet. It was the first peace we'd had in weeks. The second night we did the same, still calm. On the third night we turned off the lights, slept beside each other, holding hands. I woke briefly around 3 a.m. There was silence. I turned to look at them. They were sleeping soundly. I closed my eyes, smiled, and let sleep take me again. We never heard the whispers after that. Not once. Maybe whatever it was, it fed on fear or doubt. Maybe it needed both of us alone, isolated in suspicion. But together, something shifted. Something was stronger. We didn't talk about it much after that. Some things don't need answers to be resolved. I never forgot what I saw, what I heard, but I no longer feared it. Because in the end, whatever it was, ghost, shadow, echo, or dream, it didn't win. We did. Story 4. I was looking for a receipt, nothing more, when I flipped open the small notebook my partner usually kept in the kitchen drawer. It was just a line pad with scribbles, reminders, grocery lists, and sometimes little drawings of our dog. I had never felt the need to dig through their things, but that morning I had to return an appliance and needed proof of purchase. I did not think twice when I tugged the drawer open and rifled through the papers. The notebook was right on top, unassuming and plain, until one page caught my eye. It was the number sequence that made me pause. Written in bold ink, a 4-digit number sat by itself in the middle of the page. At first glance, it looked like any other number, but something about it felt familiar. I whispered it aloud, and it rolled off my tongue with a strange weight. It took only a few seconds to realize it was the same as our smart lock code. That in itself was not shocking. We both knew the code. What struck me was the handwritten note next to the number, left at 9:14 a.m. Tuesday. My stomach dropped. That exact time matched the last smart lock notification I saw the previous week when I was still in bed. They had said they were running errands, nothing more. I did not ask questions then, but now I wondered why the time needed to be written down. The more I stared at it, the more I questioned everything. Why record a time so precisely if nothing unusual happened? I picked up my phone and opened the smart lock history. The log showed the door unlocking at 9:14 a.m. on Tuesday and locking again at 11:02 a.m. That aligned with what they said, but now I felt something deeper, an itch behind my thoughts I could not scratch. I went back to the notebook, flipping through pages before and after. Most entries were mundane reminders about bills, a sketch of our living room layout, meal ideas. But 2 pages after the code, I found another list. This one was a bulleted breakdown of time, like a schedule. It started at 9:14 a.m. and ended around noon. Each line had things like park, coffee, call, and most notably, wait for reply. What reply? From who? I closed the notebook and sat down, trying to breathe slowly. I was not the jealous type, not paranoid either. But something about this felt intentional, secretive. I trusted my partner, but this felt like a crack in the glass, tiny but sharp and growing. I decided I would not confront them just yet. I needed more. The next day, I checked the smart lock app again, this time going further back. I noticed a pattern. On 3 separate occasions over the last month, the door was opened and closed around the same times between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. Each time was on a Tuesday. My partner did not work on Tuesdays. They always said they needed the day to reset or do house stuff. I never questioned it. I worked from home, usually too busy with meetings and deadlines. But now the pattern became a question mark. Why leave the house every Tuesday morning? And why write down only one of those times? That notebook had no other entries like it. Just that one specific time next to our code. I remembered our smart lock allowed temporary codes to be created. Curious, I logged into the settings panel to check for any unused or deleted codes. Nothing obvious showed up. But under usage history, I noticed a gap in entries the previous Tuesday. Between 10:12 a.m. and 11:02 a.m., there was no record. That was strange. I never deleted logs and my partner barely used the app. At this point, I felt both embarrassed and obsessed. Was I inventing something out of nothing? Was I looking for betrayal where there was only routine? But then I remembered something else, our security camera. It pointed toward the driveway. I opened the footage from last Tuesday and skipped to 9:14 a.m. There they were, walking briskly to the car, looking over their shoulder before pulling out. I fast-forwarded to 11:02 a.m. The car returned, but instead of walking in right away, my partner sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, talking to someone. On a call, the camera did not catch the angle inside the vehicle, but the pause before entering the house stayed with me. What were they thinking about? Why hesitate? That night I could not sleep. I turned away from them in bed, quietly listening to their breathing. I felt like a stranger in my own home, unsure whether to say something or let it go. Every time I opened my mouth, I closed it again. I was scared of what they might say. I was scared of how deep this would go. By Friday, I could not take the silence. I asked if anything strange had happened Tuesday morning. They blinked, looked confused, then shrugged and said they ran errands. That was it. No details, no timeline. I wanted to scream, but I just nodded. I felt like I was suffocating in my own restraint. They never lied before, but now their words tasted like rust. I decided to follow them the next Tuesday. I took the day off, feigned a bad headache, and stayed home while pretending to sleep in. At 9:12 a.m., they grabbed their bag and headed out. I waited a minute, then slipped out the back door and got into my car. I followed at a distance, heart pounding in my chest. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a bad drama. They drove across town, parked near a small cafe, and got out. I stayed hidden. I watched them go inside. 10 minutes passed. Then someone else arrived. A man. They hugged. Not a friend hug. It was close, long. My stomach turned. I did not wait to see more. I drove home, windows down, trying to breathe. The rest of the day was a blur. I cleaned things that did not need cleaning. I organized drawers, folded laundry. I even cooked dinner. When they came home, I asked how their morning went. They lied again. Said they went to the grocery. I nodded. I pretended to believe them. I did not mention the hug. I did not mention the cafe. That night I waited until they fell asleep and checked their phone. I knew the passcode. I hated myself for doing it, but I needed to know. There were texts from the man, not romantic, not obvious, but too frequent. Too familiar. Code words maybe. Inside jokes. Talk of timing and patience. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself. In the morning, I told them we needed to talk. I laid everything out. The notebook. The smart lock code. The cafe. The texts. Their face changed. Not anger, not guilt. Just stillness. After a long silence, they admitted it. Said it was someone they used to know. Someone they were helping. Said it was complicated. I asked why the secrets, why the lies. They said they did not want to worry me. Said it was nothing romantic. Said it was a favor for an old friend in trouble. I asked if that was true. They said yes. But something in their voice made me doubt every syllable. My heart was torn between believing and walking away. I told them I needed time. I moved into the guest room, but for days we barely spoke. They kept trying to explain, to soften the blow. I listened, but I stayed guarded. I was not ready to forgive. I needed to decide whether truth still lived here, or if I had only been a bystander in someone else's secret life. Over time, pieces began to fit together. The man had been going through something serious. Legal trouble, health issues. My partner was helping him stay under the radar. The codes, the notebooks, the hidden meetings, they were all part of that. It was real, and it was dangerous. They had not told me because it would have put both of us at risk. When I finally understood, I felt both relief and sadness. Relief that it was not betrayal. Sadness that I had not been trusted. But we talked, slowly, honestly. We built back the pieces with new rules, new openness. The smart lock was reprogrammed, the notebook burned. We made promises, not with grand words, but in small daily actions. In the end, I realized secrets grow in silence. But truth, when given room, can still breathe. We are still here, still trying. Not perfect. Not the same, but real. And sometimes that is enough. Story 5. I had only been living with my boyfriend for 3 weeks when I heard the knock. It was just past 10 in the morning, and I was still in my pajamas, sipping lukewarm coffee while scrolling through emails. At first, I thought maybe he had forgotten something and returned from work, but the knock was too sharp, too impersonal. Peeking through the window, I saw a delivery guy standing beside 3 brown boxes stacked neatly at his feet. I opened the door and smiled out of habit, signing without really looking at the labels. He nodded and walked off quickly, probably in a rush to finish his route. I bent down to pick up the boxes and noticed the strange thing almost immediately. All 3 packages were addressed to me, but listed an address I did not recognize. It was not ours, it was off by just a few numbers, but it was still a street in the same neighborhood. I carried them inside, puzzled, and placed them on the kitchen table. I checked the names again. My full name was printed clearly on each one, spelled correctly and without error. The return address section was blank. I found it odd that someone would send something to me at a house I had never lived in, especially with such precision about my name. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe someone had tried to send me a surprise and got the address wrong. I called my boyfriend to ask if he knew anything about it. He picked up after a few rings and sounded distracted. I explained the situation briefly, hoping for a quick answer, but he paused. He asked me what the wrong address was, and when I told him, there was a silence on the line that stretched too long to ignore. Then he said, almost too casually, that the address used to belong to his ex-girlfriend. He said he was surprised, not because the packages were there, but because it had my name on them. Or that changed everything. I asked him if she had ever met me or knew anything about me. He said no. As far as he knew, she did not know anything personal about me at all. I stared at the boxes, suddenly unwilling to open them. My heart was beating a little faster now, my coffee forgotten and growing colder by the second. Still, I needed to know what was inside. I opened the first box slowly, using a knife from the kitchen drawer to cut through the tape. Inside were dozens of folded papers, neatly stacked in bundles and tied with string. I pulled out the first bundle and untied it, then unfolded the top sheet. My breath caught. It was a sketch of pencil drawing of me, so accurate it could have been traced from a photograph. I stared at the drawing for a long time, unable to speak. It showed me sitting at our dining table, wearing a sweater I remembered from a week ago. The detail was haunting right down to the strands of hair tucked behind my ear. I checked the next one. Another drawing, this time of me brushing my teeth in the bathroom. It was a perspective no one could have seen unless they had been watching me. I felt sick. I opened the second box, hoping it would be something less disturbing. But it was more of the same drawings, all of me, all from recent moments. Me asleep on the couch, me reading a book on the balcony, or me standing at the window, looking out. There were no notes, no messages, just hundreds of sketches. The third box was identical, filled with more drawings. I called my boyfriend again. I was shaking now, holding one of the images in my hand as I explained what I had found. He told me to wait until he got home. I could hear the urgency in his voice, but I could also sense that something was being held back. I asked him if he thought it was her, his ex, but he just told me to lock the doors. I did as he said. I locked every door and checked every window. I pulled the curtains shut and sat in the living room with my phone on the coffee table in front of me. I kept looking at the drawings, spread out like a gallery of my most private moments. Whoever did this had been watching me closely, too closely, and they knew where I lived. When he finally got home, he looked more angry than surprised. He picked up one of the drawings and stared at it without saying anything. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. His ex had once studied art. She had taken drawing classes and had a habit of sketching the people around her. He admitted they did not end on good terms, and she had not taken the breakup well. I asked if she was capable of something like this. He said he did not think so, but he had no other explanation. He suggested we report it, just in case. I hesitated, unsure what the police could even do with something like this. There were no threats, no crimes committed, just hundreds of eerie, intimate portraits. Still, we made the call. The officer who arrived looked through the boxes and asked questions. He took photos of the drawings and the packages. He asked if we had any security cameras. We told him we did not. He said it might be hard to prove who sent them, but he would file a report. He advised us to stay alert and to consider installing cameras. I barely slept that night. I kept imagining someone watching me through the windows, sketching my every move. Every shadow outside seemed suspicious. Every creak in the floor made me sit up. My boyfriend tried to comfort me, but I could tell he was shaken too. Whatever this was, it felt like a warning. Over the next few days, I checked the porch constantly. No more packages came, but the damage was already done. I felt exposed in my own home. I stopped leaving the curtains open. I stopped doing things in the open areas of the apartment. Even brushing my hair felt vulnerable. A week passed before anything else happened. I got a message from an unknown number. It was short. Just 4 words, "Do you feel seen?" My chest tightened as I read it. I showed my boyfriend, and he immediately called the officer who had helped us before. The officer asked if we could come in to talk. At the station, we explained everything again. They asked if we wanted to pursue a restraining order, but without proof of who sent the drawings or the message, there was little to do. They advised us to change our numbers and keep records of anything else unusual. So we did. We got new phones, we put up cameras. I stopped going out alone. I started thinking of moving. The apartment no longer felt safe. But part of me did not want to be pushed out. I wanted answers more than anything else. So I started looking into the ex's social media. But most of her accounts were private or inactive, but I found one blog she used years ago. It had a gallery section, and in one of the posts, dated over a year ago, was a drawing. It was unmistakably me. Not as I looked now, but still me. A drawing of a woman with my face, sitting at a window. The background was vague, but the posture and facial features were identical. I stared at it for hours. That image had been drawn before I even met my boyfriend. I showed him the post, and he was silent for a long time. Then he admitted something that made me feel faint. He had talked about me before we met. To his ex, he had described me to her someone he had seen at a local bookstore and thought was interesting. He never expected to actually meet me later, but he had once told her that if he ever dated someone new, it might be me. I did not know what to say. That meant she had known about me even before we met. That night, we burned the drawings. It felt dramatic, but it also felt necessary. We lit them one by one in a metal bin behind the building. The flames turned the paper into ash quickly, the pencil lines curling and vanishing in the heat. I watched the smoke rise, trying to let go of the fear that had wrapped around me. We moved the following month. A new apartment, farther away from everything. I took only what I needed and left the rest. I never received another package. I never got another message. Some nights I still wonder if she watches from somewhere, sketchbook in hand. But I do not let the fear control me anymore. What happened changed me, but it did not break me. I learned how to be careful, how to listen to my instincts, and how to protect my space. I no longer leave my windows wide open, but I do not hide either. If someone thought they could frighten me into silence, they failed. I live differently now, but I still live fully, and I am not afraid to be seen. Story 6. When I first moved in, the house seemed quiet in a comforting way. The listing had advertised it as a private room in a country-style property just outside of town, ideal for someone like me looking to start over with a bit of solitude. The landlord met me at the front door, offered a brief tour, and pointed to a detached unit just behind the main house. He said it used to be a guest house, but he preferred to rent it out now. It was small but clean, and I was grateful to finally have a space of my own. There was nothing unusual during those first few days. The air was cool in the mornings, and the trees around the property offered a calming rustle when the wind passed through. I didn't hear much from the main house, except for an occasional shuffle of footsteps or the faint clink of dishes at night. The landlord worked during the day, or so he claimed, and he didn't seem interested in small talk. That suited me fine. I was just there to stay quiet, work my remote job, and heal from what I had left behind. The only thing that struck me as odd was the padlocked door at the back of the main house. I noticed it once while walking around to find where the garbage bins were kept. It looked sturdy, older than the rest of the building, and unlike the other doors, this one was reinforced. When I asked about it casually later, the landlord waved it off and said it was a storage room he didn't use anymore. I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone has secrets, I figured. At night, I sometimes heard noises I couldn't quite place. Soft tapping, a dragging sound, slow and rhythmic. Once I woke up at around 3 a.m. to what I thought was a knock on my window, but when I checked, no one was there. I convinced myself it was just a branch or an animal brushing against the glass. The countryside was full of strange sounds I wasn't used to yet. A few weeks in, I started noticing things that didn't add up. There were toys in the backyard, old and weather-worn, tucked beneath the trees like they had been abandoned. One afternoon, while coming home early from town, I saw a shadow move behind one of the curtains in the main house's second-floor window. I didn't think the landlord was home, and when I asked him later, he said I must have imagined it. He looked directly at me when he said it, not blinking once. One day, while walking back from the mailbox, I saw a woman's face in that same second-floor window. Pale, unmoving. I froze. She was watching me, but not in a curious way. Her expression was vacant, distant, like she wasn't seeing me at all. Before I could react, the curtain dropped, and she was gone. I stood there for a long time, unsure if I had actually seen her. The next time I saw the landlord, I asked again if anyone else lived on the property. He said no, just him. When I mentioned the face in the window, he chuckled dryly and said maybe I had seen a reflection. I knew what I saw, but I dropped the subject. Something about the way he dismissed it made my skin crawl. I began paying more attention to the sounds at night. I noticed they always came from the same direction, near the back of the main house, where the padlocked door was. Sometimes I heard muffled crying, other times strange whispering, though it never made sense. I bought a cheap recorder and left it by my open window, hidden behind the curtain. What I captured made my stomach turn. It was a voice. A soft, slurred one repeating the same words over and over. Let me out. Let me out. It was distorted, like the speaker couldn't form their mouth properly. I listened to it 5 times before I shut it off. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I noticed the recorder had been moved. I debated calling someone, but I had no real proof. I considered confronting the landlord, but I feared what would happen if I did. Instead, I waited until he was out one Saturday and tried to explore the property. I walked behind the main house and stood in front of the padlocked door. My hands trembled as I reached out and touched the metal, old and solid. A sound came from behind it, a dragging sound. I stepped back and ran. My heart was racing the entire way back to the guest house. I didn't go near that part of the property again, but I couldn't stop thinking about what was on the other side of that door. I knew, deep down, that I hadn't imagined any of it. Everything shifted the day I received a package that wasn't mine. It had been delivered to the front porch of the main house, and the landlord was out again. The label had no name, only the address, and I assumed it was for me. For inside was a small plastic bag filled with pills and a medical form with a name blacked out. The diagnosis line read severe cognitive impairment and muscular dystrophy. My fingers went numb. The next time I saw the landlord, he seemed more agitated than usual. He didn't mention the package, but he lingered longer than he needed to. He asked if I was sleeping okay, if I ever heard strange noises. The way he asked made it sound like a trap. I lied and said everything was fine. He smiled and walked away, but his eyes stayed on me longer than they should have. I decided I needed to leave. I started packing that night. I didn't have much to bring with me, just essentials. I made arrangements to stay with an old friend in the city. I thought I would leave quietly, without confrontation. But something in me needed closure. One last look before I left. One last try to understand what I had been living next to. The next morning I waited until the landlord drove off in his truck. I walked back to the padlocked door, this time with a hammer in my hand. I struck the lock twice before it broke open. The door creaked as it opened. What I saw inside made my breath catch. A narrow hallway led to a single room. Inside was a bed, stained and thin, and in it lay a young woman no older than 20. Her limbs were curled inward, and her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. She didn't react to me. Beside her was a tray of uneaten food and a portable toilet. The room smelled of damp cloth and something sour. I whispered, unsure what to say. She didn't answer, but I saw her eyes shift slightly. She was aware, she was real, and she had been hidden here, deliberately kept like a secret. I backed out slowly, heart thudding. I knew then that this wasn't just about silence. This was about control, and I had been living feet away from someone imprisoned in her own home. I left without telling the landlord. I reported everything anonymously from the city. I gave the address, described what I saw, sent the photos I had taken that morning. I never heard back. I never returned. I blocked every number associated with that place. I even changed my name on rental applications. Sometimes I dream of her face in the window, the horrors of the dragging sounds at night. I wonder if she ever got out. If someone finally came. I think about going back, about trying to find her, but I know I wouldn't survive stepping on that land again. The memory is enough to keep me distant. I've rented other rooms since then, but I always ask more questions now. I check the corners. I look behind every locked door. I listen at night for sounds that don't belong. And when the quiet becomes too deep, I remind myself that silence can be a prison too. Still, I hope someone braver than me followed up. I hope that woman was given sunlight and real food and her name back. I don't know her story. I only saw the ending of a chapter I wasn't supposed to read. But I left the door open, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Story 7. It started during a fight that had nothing to do with anything paranormal. We were arguing about something small like dishes or laundry, but our tempers had been short for days. Stress had built up between us, the kind that creeps in after months of unspoken frustrations. Just as I was about to storm out of the room, she said something that stopped me cold. Her voice cracked as she said she had not been sleeping because of voices coming from the bedroom window at exactly 3 a.m. At first, I thought she meant she was having nightmares. But she looked dead serious, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. I asked her what she meant, and she told me she had been hearing whispers, murmurs of people talking right outside our window every single night at the same time. She had not told me before, because she thought it was just her imagination. But when the noise began repeating itself, she could no longer ignore it. I laughed a little, nervously, trying to lighten the mood. I told her it was probably neighbors or late-night delivery guys chatting by the curb. But we live on a quiet street, far from any main road, and our backyard is fenced off. She shook her head and said the voices were not coming from the street. They were just outside the glass, as if someone was standing right beneath the window whispering. That night I agreed to stay awake with her to prove nothing was there. We sat up in the bedroom, lights off, curtains open slightly so we could see the window. The room was dead silent, except for the occasional creak of the house settling. I watched the clock tick past 2 a.m., then 2:30, and I started feeling silly. But she sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the window. When the clock turned to 3 a.m., it was as if the temperature dropped. I felt a chill settle into my spine, even though the air conditioning had not changed. Then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it, whispering. Not words exactly, but soft voices blending together, like a distant conversation just out of reach. I turned to my wife, and she nodded slowly. She had heard it too. I got up and walked to the window, pushing the curtain aside fully and pressing my face close to the glass. There was nothing outside. No movement, no figures, not even the sound of wind. But the voices continued, whispering from nowhere, from everywhere. I opened the window, and the whispering stopped instantly. The air outside was still and heavy, but empty. I closed the window and backed away slowly. We sat together on the bed, staring at each other. I no longer doubted her. We made coffee and stayed up until the sun came up, not saying much. The next night, we decided to try again, this time recording the audio on my phone. I placed the phone by the window and hit record at 2:45 a.m. We waited. At 3 a.m., right on schedule, the whispers returned. I shivered and clenched my fists. I could hear soft laughing mixed in, like the sound of children playing far away. My wife whispered that she could hear them saying her name over and over. When I listened to the recording later, there was nothing on it but silence. No voices, no background noise, not even our own breathing. I replayed it several times, hoping to catch even a faint sound, but it was completely blank. We were hearing something that machines could not. Over the next few days, we tried everything. We rearranged furniture, sealed the window, played music at night. But the voices always came back at 3 a.m. It became our routine to sit up and wait for them. We began to notice patterns. Some nights the voices were loud and clear. Other nights, they were muffled and frantic. Once I swore I heard my own voice among them, echoing something I had said years ago. We started sleeping in shifts. One of us would stay up to listen. The other would try to get some rest. But sleep became difficult. The whispers haunted our dreams when we did manage to drift off. I began to see shadows moving past the window in my peripheral vision, always gone when I looked directly at them. My wife became more withdrawn. She said the voices were becoming more personal, more demanding. One night she broke down and said they had asked her to come outside. They had promised her peace, an end to the noise, if she would just step through the door and walk into the yard. I locked the back door that night and hid the key. I could feel the toll it was taking on both of us. We stopped arguing, not because things got better, but because we were too exhausted to fight. Everything was measured by the space between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Our world shrank to that 1 hour, that single moment of fear and confusion. I tried talking to a therapist, but I left out the part about the voices. I told her I was having trouble sleeping, that my wife was anxious, that our home felt strange. She gave me medication and told me to try relaxation techniques. None of it helped. The worst night was the one I tried to ignore them. I put in earplugs, wore a sleep mask, and took the pills the therapist prescribed. I wanted one night of peace. I woke up screaming at 3:07 a.m., drenched in sweat, my wife shaking me awake. She said I had been talking in my sleep, whispering back to the voices. She had tried to wake me for several minutes, but I would not respond. After that, we both stopped pretending this was anything we could fix. We started researching similar stories online. Most people dismissed them as sleep paralysis or hallucinations. A few mentioned things that were eerily close to what we were experiencing. One person described hearing whispers through their wall every night until they moved out. Another said the voices were a call, not a warning, and that they regretted answering. We talked about moving, selling the house, leaving everything behind. But the thought of explaining that to anyone felt impossible. We had no proof, just sleepless nights and a growing unease that felt like mold under the wallpaper. One evening, I got brave enough to go outside at 3 a.m. I took a flashlight and walked into the yard while my wife stayed in the bedroom. I stood directly beneath the window and waited. The whispers were louder out there, clearer. I still could not make out the words, but they circled me like insects. I felt something brush past my arm, but nothing was there. I turned off the flashlight and stood in the dark. I wanted to understand. I whispered back, asking what they wanted. The air turned cold again, and I felt something close to anger. I backed away and returned to the house, locking the door behind me. I told my wife what I had done, and she started crying. The next day, I took time off work, and she did the same. We decided we needed help, not from doctors or therapists, but from someone who understood what this might be. We found a woman who specialized in energy cleansing. She came to the house and walked through each room with quiet focus. She paused by the bedroom window and placed her hand on the glass. She said the energy there was thick, old, and restless. Not evil, but not kind either. She told us something had been feeding on attention, on emotion. That it had grown stronger because we had focused on it so much. She performed a ritual, burned some herbs, and chanted quietly while we stood in silence. She told us to stop listening for the voices, to take away their stage, to fill our home with sound and laughter and light. We were skeptical, but desperate. That night we watched movies, played music, and talked about our favorite memories. At 3 a.m. we kept the volume up and did not sit by the window. We did that every night for a week. The whispers faded. The shadows stopped appearing. Our sleep returned slowly, but it returned. Now, months later, the house feels different, lighter. We do not hear the voices anymore, but we still leave music playing softly through the night. We never sit silently in the dark at 3 a.m. And we never talk about what we heard, not really. But sometimes, when I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, I wonder, if we had opened the window just once, would they have stopped? Or would they have come inside? I will never know. And I never want to find out. Story 8. It started as something innocent. I was scrolling through my fiance's phone, looking for a specific picture we had taken together on a trip a few months back. They had handed it to me willingly, no password change, no hesitation. That in itself was comforting. But as I flipped through the photos, my thumb paused on something that made my stomach twist. The photo was dark, grainy, but clearly taken inside my bedroom. My first instinct was to laugh and assume it was a mistake or a weird accident. But the timestamp didn't make sense. It was taken at 2:47 a.m., a night I clearly remembered because I had gone to bed early, completely alone. My fiance was out of town that week. I tapped the image to expand it. It showed my bed from across the room. I was in it, curled under the blanket, facing the wall. The camera angle made it look like someone had taken the picture from the foot of the bed. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. I checked the next photo. It was nearly identical, taken a minute later. My position hadn't changed. Another followed, then another, and 4 pictures in total, all taken within the same 10-minute window. I checked the metadata just to be sure. All of them were time-stamped in the middle of the night while I was asleep. I scrolled back through the rest of the gallery. Most were mundane selfies, random meals, snapshots of receipts. But nestled between ordinary photos were these chilling images of me sleeping. I felt cold. My chest tightened. There was no way my fiance should have had access to that room. We didn't live together yet. They had never spent a night in my apartment. I always locked my bedroom door before bed, a habit from years of living alone. There was no key except the one I kept on my nightstand. The door had no signs of forced entry. So how had they gotten in? I didn't confront them immediately. I needed time to think. I copied the photos onto my own phone and deleted my activity. That night, I barely slept. I stared at my bedroom door for hours, replaying every moment from that week in my head. I had no memory of hearing anyone, no sense of being watched. The next day, I invited them over. I acted normal, casual, even affectionate. I needed to see their face when I brought it up. Over dinner, I mentioned my sleep schedule, asked if they ever stayed up late when traveling. They answered without blinking, saying they always went to bed early on work trips. Then I asked about the photos. Their smile froze. Just for a second. Then they leaned back and laughed awkwardly, asking what photos I meant. I pulled out my phone and showed them one of the images. Their face went pale. That laugh didn't come back. They said they didn't know how it got there, suggested maybe someone else took it and sent it to them. I asked who. They had no answer. I pressed harder. Their story crumbled. They changed details, said maybe they had been sleepwalking, maybe I had sent the photo as a prank. But I never took those pictures. It became clear they were lying. But I didn't know why. That was the worst part, the violation of trust. The idea that someone I was planning to marry had entered my space without my knowledge, while I slept, and that they had documented it like some kind of trophy. I ended the evening early and asked them to leave. They didn't argue. As soon as the door closed, I relocked everything. I checked the windows, the back door, even the vents. Paranoia crept in like fog. I didn't feel safe anymore, not in my own bed. The next morning, I changed the locks. I installed a camera in my bedroom and one by the door. I didn't tell anyone. I kept quiet, playing dumb, pretending I was still processing. I needed to know if it would happen again. Deep down, I feared it would. A week passed, then another. No incidents. No strange photos. My fiancée texted every day, asking to talk, to explain, to fix things. I gave short replies. I needed time. But I wasn't healing, I was observing. One night, close to 3 a.m., my bedroom camera pinged an alert. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. I checked the feed. The room was still empty, but the door handle moved. Slowly. Not enough to open, but enough to catch the sensor. I froze. I stayed completely silent. The handle stilled after a moment. Then nothing. No footsteps. No sound. I waited until sunrise before moving from bed. When I checked the footage again, I saw the handle jiggle slightly at exactly 3:12 a.m. It matched the timestamp from the original photos. I brought the footage to the police. They said it wasn't enough. No forced entry, no direct image of someone breaking in. They recommended changing the locks again and maybe filing for a restraining order. But legally, they couldn't act without more. I confronted my fiancé again, this time with the video. They denied everything, said it wasn't them. Said maybe I was faking it, trying to punish them. Their anger seemed forced, theatrical. There was fear in their eyes, but not the fear of being wrongfully accused. It was the fear of getting caught. I blocked them after that, deleted their number, or cut off all contact. I notified my building's security and told neighbors to report anything strange. I was done waiting. I wanted to take my life back. I upgraded the locks a second time, reinforced the bedroom door, and kept the cameras active 24/7. I even started sleeping with a flashlight under my pillow. Weeks passed with no more alerts. No more photos. No more late-night whispers from the hallway. Eventually, the fear began to fade. I focused on work, friends, rebuilding trust in myself. I even started journaling to process everything. It was hard, but I knew I'd made the right choice. Whatever explanation they had, it was buried under too many lies to matter anymore. Then one afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail, or no return address. Inside was a single printed photo of me asleep in bed. The angle was the same as before. The timestamp was from the previous night. I dropped the photo. My hands were shaking. I checked my camera footage. It showed nothing. No one entered. No movement. No door handle. Nothing. But somehow they had been in the room. Again. Manchuri. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, phone in one hand, flashlight in the other. At 2:46 a.m., I heard it. A quiet creak from the hallway. I tiptoed to the door and flung it open. Nothing. No one. Just the same oppressive silence. The next day, I packed a bag and left. I moved in temporarily with a friend across town. I didn't explain everything, just said I needed space or break. I contacted a security expert and had my apartment swept. They found a tiny hidden camera behind a vent near the ceiling facing the bed. It had been broadcasting somewhere. Maybe even live. They couldn't trace it. It had its own power source and transmitter, hidden too well for a simple fix. I had it all removed, the entire ventilation cover replaced. I filed another police report, this time with evidence. I never heard from my fiancé again. They disappeared from social media, changed numbers, ghosted mutual friends. It was as if they knew the walls were closing in and slipped out just in time. I stayed away from that apartment for a month. When I finally returned, it felt like walking into someone else's life. But slowly I reclaimed the space, repainted the walls, rearranged furniture, bought a new bed. I made the room mine again, one careful step at a time. It wasn't easy, but I refused to let fear decide where I belonged. Months passed. No more photos, no more signs of intrusion. Just peace, finally. I learned that love, no matter how deep, isn't a shield against darkness. Sometimes it's the thing that hides it best. And now, when I lock my bedroom door at night, I sleep without fear. Because I know the door is locked from the inside. And no one is getting in again. Story 9. When my partner told me we're having a guest over for dinner, I barely looked up from the sink. They called them a friend from work, someone they had not seen in a while. I did not question it. We often had people over, colleagues, neighbors, sometimes clients. It was nothing unusual, just another night to smile and play host. I cleaned up the kitchen and set the table while my partner prepped the food. They seemed excited, maybe a little too much. Their energy was high, like they were nervous or rehearsing. I thought it was just because they wanted everything to go well. I told them not to stress, that dinner would be fine, and guests rarely noticed the details we obsessed over. When the doorbell rang, I dried my hands and opened the door. The guests stood there, all smiles and casual charm. They looked slightly younger, well put together, and had a kind of ease that made you want to like them. They handed over a bottle of wine as a gift, which I accepted, though I was not sure we would even open it. I led them to the dining area while my partner brought the food. The conversation started off light. Well, we talked about work, travel, current events. The guest asked polite questions, laughed at all the right moments, and complimented the food more than once. My partner kept the conversation moving, but something in their tone felt distant, like they were playing a role. I made a mental note of it, but brushed it aside. Halfway through the meal, my partner stood up and said they needed to use the bathroom. They gave me a small smile, the kind that said I'll be right back. I nodded, barely thinking about it. The guest and I kept chatting, and the pause did not feel strange at first. I asked a question about where they were from, and they answered easily, then asked about me in return. 10 minutes passed, and my partner had not returned. I made a joke about them getting lost in our tiny hallway. The guest chuckled but glanced toward the hallway too. I excused myself, thinking maybe something was wrong, a migraine, an upset stomach, anything. But when I reached the bathroom door, it was open, and the light was off. No one was there. I checked the bedroom. Nothing. I called their name. Silence. I looked out the window and saw that their car was gone. At first I felt dizzy. It made no sense. They would not just leave in the middle of dinner without a word. I pulled out my phone and called them. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I walked back into the dining room, trying to stay composed. The guest was still sitting there, fork in hand, like they were waiting for instructions. I asked if they knew where my partner went. They shrugged and said no. Maybe they had an emergency. But their eyes didn't match their words. They were calm, too calm. That was when I realized something was very wrong. I sat down, staring at my plate. I felt exposed, like someone had pulled the rug out from under me while I smiled and poured drinks. The guests didn't offer any real help. They just sipped their water and watched me like I was part of some performance. After a few minutes of silence, they cleared their throat and said they should probably go. I walked them to the door in a fog. When they stepped outside, they turned and gave me a strange smile, not cruel, just final. They said thank you for dinner and walked off down the street. Not toward a car, just off. Like they had no intention of being found again. I shut the door behind them and locked it out of instinct, though I didn't feel safe. Not even in my own home. I spent the next hour calling my partner, texting, leaving voicemails. No response. I checked their location, but the tracking was turned off. I paced the hallway, wondering if I should call someone, report them missing. But how do you report someone who left their own dinner on purpose? It didn't seem like a disappearance. It felt like an escape. By midnight, I was unraveling. I checked our bedroom again, our closet, our drawers. Some of their clothes were gone. Not everything, but enough. A go bag had been packed, carefully. This was planned. I found a small envelope tucked in the sock drawer with my name on it. Inside was a short note, handwritten. It said they were sorry, but they had to leave. That they had kept things from me and they couldn't carry the weight anymore. There was no mention of where they were going or who they were with. Just a line about how they hoped one day I would understand. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping it would change. I slept on the couch that night, not because I had to, but because I could not bear to lie in our bed alone. The house was still, but my mind raced. Who was that guest? Why involve me in this strange farewell? Why disappear in such a cruel, theatrical way? I felt like I had been used as a prop, not a partner. The next day I went through their things again. Most of the important stuff was gone. Passport, important documents, a few valuables, all missing. I found receipts for a storage unit and a one-way flight booked a week ago. They had planned this, not just the leaving but the dinner, the guests, the whole night. I tried to track the name from the flight booking. It was not one I recognized. Probably fake. I visited the storage unit address, but when I arrived, the code did not work. I talked to the manager, but they claimed they could not give information without legal paperwork. I left feeling defeated, more confused than ever. Over the next few weeks, I went through the motions of life. Work, meals, sleep. I told close friends they had left unexpectedly. I did not share details. Some told me to move on. Others said I should try harder to find them. I wanted to scream at all of them. They did not understand what it felt like to be left mid-sentence. Then, one night I got a letter. No return address. Postmarked from a different city. Inside was a photo of my partner, smiling, standing on a rocky coastline. There was no message, just that image. I turned it over and checked every corner for a clue. Nothing. But the photo itself felt like a quiet apology. It was a sign that they were alive, maybe even at peace. That was the moment I let go. Not all at once, but enough to breathe again. I boxed up their things, donated what I could, stored the rest. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture. Not out of bitterness, but necessity. I needed to take back my space, my story, my name. Months passed, and the memory of that dinner still sat heavy in the back of my mind. But slowly it stopped defining my days. I began to enjoy silence again, to cook for myself without expecting someone else to show up. I went on walks. I read books. I laughed with friends without guilt. Healing came in small doses. One day I received another letter. This one had no photo, just words. A real explanation. They had been in danger. Something they could not explain before. That guest had been a messenger, someone helping them get away. They did not trust the system, the authorities, even me, because too many things had already gone wrong. They asked for forgiveness, not for leaving, but for how they left. Said they regretted hurting me and hoped I found peace. There was no request to reconnect. Just a final truth, shared with no expectation. I folded the letter and placed it in a box labeled closure. And this time, it felt like enough. In the end, I stopped searching. Not because I stopped caring, but because I started choosing myself. My partner may have vanished that night, but I did not. I remained. I rebuilt. I carried the weight until it no longer crushed me. And now, I move forward. Not alone. Just whole. Story 10. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when I decided to change the sheets. The sunlight was streaming through the windows, soft and golden, and I wanted everything to feel fresh before the week started. My partner had gone out for groceries, leaving me alone in the apartment. As I tugged the fitted sheet from the edge of the mattress, something heavy slid out from underneath the pillows. I froze when I saw it. It was a phone I had never seen before. Not his usual one, not the model I knew, and definitely not the case he always carried. This one was black, unmarked, and slightly scuffed, as if it had been handled often but never cared for. My first thought was that it might be old, something forgotten. But the screen lit up with a notification as I held it. A message appeared in bold letters. It was from someone listed only by an initial, and it read, "You should really tell her. She looks so naive." My chest tightened. My hands shook a little as I unlocked the phone, surprised to find no password at all. The home screen was minimal, with only a few apps, most of them messaging apps, and nearly everyone had unread messages. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe it belonged to someone else entirely. But the curiosity won. I opened the first messaging app and scrolled. The same contact, the same tone, and the same topic me. There were dozens of messages, all sent recently, discussing me in a way that made me feel like a stranger to my own life. She does not suspect a thing. She thinks you are perfect. You said you would end it. How long are you going to lie to her? Each message was like a pinprick in my skin. My eyes blurred as I scrolled faster, skipping through words that painted me as clueless, blind, and stupid. They called me names I had never heard used against me before. The person on the other end seemed confident, even smug. They talked about how I had no idea what was happening behind my back, how easily I trusted, how I believed every excuse and never asked too many questions. They called me sweet and gullible, like it was an insult. I could not breathe for a moment. I dropped the phone on the bed and sat down. My thoughts were loud, messy, crashing into each other. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But most of all, I wanted answers. I tried to remember any signs I might have missed. Late night phone calls, muted notifications, small lies about where he had been. Had I ignored all of it? I stood up and began pacing. The walls felt closer than usual. I picked up the phone again and searched through the photos, hoping to find something concrete. Most of the photos were of documents or rooms I did not recognize. Then I found a picture of my partner with someone else. It was blurry and cropped tightly, but unmistakably him. They were sitting close, smiling at something off camera. It did not look like a casual friendship. It looked like two people comfortable in each other's world. I could not tell where it was taken, but it was recent. He wore the same hoodie he had worn just 3 nights ago. My heart sank deeper into my chest. I went to the call logs. Countless calls to the same number. Some were just a few minutes. Others stretched over an hour. I knew that number was not mine. I had never spoken to anyone at that frequency. I felt cold and disconnected, like the room had shifted into something unfamiliar. Then the door opened. He walked in with 2 bags of groceries, smiling like nothing had happened. I forced myself to act normal for a second, to take the bags and place them on the counter. But inside, everything was unraveling. I asked him casually if he had another phone. He laughed and said no, just the one he always used. I held up the black phone. His smile disappeared. The room went quiet. He asked where I found it, but I already knew that question was meant to buy him time. I told him I had seen the messages. He did not deny them. He just sat down and rubbed his face, like the weight of everything had finally landed. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting. He told me it was complicated, that it had started before we got serious, that he had tried to end it, but it was hard, that she did not take it well, that she threatened to ruin things. Every excuse he gave made me feel smaller. I asked him why he let it go on this long. He had no real answer. He apologized, said he never meant for me to find out this way, that he loved me, and he was going to fix it. But the words felt hollow. If he truly cared, why did it take me discovering a hidden phone for the truth to come out? Why did he let someone mock me behind my back without putting a stop to it? I told him I needed space. He tried to stop me from walking out, but I pushed past him and left the apartment. I did not know where I was going, only that I needed to get away. I walked through the streets, numb, surrounded by people who had no idea what had just collapsed in my world. I sat on a park bench and cried. Later that evening, I checked into a small hotel. I could not bear to sleep in the same bed that had hidden the phone. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship. The way he held my hand, the way he said goodnight, All the times he promised there was no one else. All of it tainted now. The next morning, I made a decision. I returned to the apartment when I knew he would be at work. I gathered my things quickly and left the key on the kitchen table. I did not leave a note. There was nothing left to say. I blocked his number and deleted our photos. I needed a clean break. The first few weeks were the hardest. I doubted everything. I questioned my own judgment. I wondered how I could have been so blind. But slowly I started to heal. I leaned on friends. I kept busy. I started going to therapy to talk through the trust issues that had taken root. I did not want to carry that pain forever. One afternoon, a message came from an unknown number. It was short. "I hope you are happy now." I knew it was her. I deleted it without replying. I refused to be pulled back into their twisted drama. I was done being the naive one. I was done being the target of their secrets. In time, I found peace. I moved into a new apartment with light blue walls and big windows that let in the sun. I adopted a cat and named her something cheerful. I started reading again. I made new friends. I laughed without guilt. I trusted myself more. And I learned to pay attention to red flags, even the ones I used to excuse away. One evening, I looked in the mirror and saw strength I had never seen before. I had survived betrayal without letting it destroy my belief in love or in myself. I did not become bitter. I became wiser. And when I finally met someone new, I took my time. I asked questions. I made no room for secrets. I do not regret finding that second phone. It hurt, but it also saved me from living a lie. It gave me the truth I needed, even if it shattered me first. I am no longer afraid of being called naive, because now I know that being kind does not mean being foolish. I just gave my trust to the wrong person. But I walked away, and I never looked back. Story 11. Our anniversary had never been a big production before. Usually it was dinner at home, maybe a movie, sometimes a small gift or a handwritten note. But this year he said he had something special planned. He was acting more excited than usual, pacing a little, grinning in a way that made me nervous. When I asked what he was up to, he just told me to be patient. That evening, he handed me a wrapped box while we sat on the couch. It was heavier than I expected, and inside was a brand new virtual reality headset, sleek and high-end. I was confused for a moment, unsure why this would be his chosen gift, but I smiled anyway and thanked him. He leaned forward, eager, and told me to put it on right away. There was something he really wanted me to see. I slipped it on, adjusted the straps, and waited for the visuals to load. The display flickered for a second before settling into a high-definition stream. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. It was our bedroom. The angle was from the upper corner of the room like a security camera, and everything was perfectly still. The bed, the nightstand, even the open closet door were just as I had left them that morning. My stomach turned as I realized this was a live feed. I asked him what I was looking at, trying to keep my voice calm. He laughed a little, not out of cruelty, but like he thought it was funny. He told me it was just a precaution, a little way to keep us safe. He said he had installed the camera months ago and finally set up the live feed as a surprise. I took the headset off slowly, my fingers shaking slightly. I wanted to say something, anything, but my thoughts were scrambled. He didn't seem to notice the change in my expression. He poured wine and turned on music, humming softly as if nothing strange had just happened. I sat on the edge of the couch, the headset in my lap, wondering how long he had been watching. Later that night, when he was asleep, I walked into the bedroom and stared at the ceiling. I scanned every inch until I found it, a tiny black circle tucked into the molding near the vent. If I hadn't known what to look for, I never would have noticed it. I felt a cold rush through my chest. He had been recording me in here for who knows how long. I didn't confront him right away. I needed to understand why he had done it. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood something. The next day, while he was out, I checked his computer. I found folders marked by date, each one containing hours of footage from inside our room. Some were from months ago, all of them labeled in his handwriting. There were videos of me getting dressed, sleeping, reading, talking on the phone. He had cataloged them meticulously, adding notes to some of the file names. I felt like I was suffocating. I didn't understand how someone who claimed to love me could do something so invasive without even asking. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. That night I didn't sleep. I kept one eye on the ceiling, one foot ready to move. He held me like everything was normal, his arm draped lazily across my side. In the dark, I began planning how to get out. I knew I had to act carefully. The last thing I wanted was to make him suspicious too early. Over the next few days, I started gathering information. I looked through our lease, the bills, anything that could tell me how deeply he had buried himself into my life. I discovered more cameras, not just in the bedroom, but in the hallway and even the laundry room. He had placed them so discreetly I never would have found them if I hadn't known to look. I began to feel paranoid every time I moved. I wondered if he could hear me whispering to myself, or if he had placed microphones too. I stopped using my phone inside the house and started walking to the park just to make calls. I contacted a locksmith and a friend who owed me a favor. I told them very little, only that I needed help moving fast and without questions. I created a list of everything I needed to take with me. Essentials only. Important documents, cash, my laptop. I knew I wouldn't be able to carry everything, and that I would have to leave sentimental things behind. That hurt more than I expected, but it was a necessary sacrifice. I couldn't afford to hesitate once the time came. He didn't notice the change in me, or maybe he did and assumed I was just tired. He kept acting like nothing was wrong, bringing me coffee in the mornings, playing our favorite shows at night. Every time he smiled, I wondered how many times he had watched me without my knowledge, without my consent. I felt like I was being held in a cage with invisible bars. On the fourth night after discovering the footage, I moved forward with my plan. I waited until he was deep asleep, then carefully slid out of bed. I retrieved the packed bag from behind the dresser, turned off my phone, and slipped out the door. My friend was waiting 2 blocks away in a parked car, the engine already running. We didn't speak much during the drive. I gave her the short version, just enough for her to understand why I couldn't go back. She took me to a small apartment she had just started renting but hadn't moved into yet. It was empty, save for a mattress on the floor and some bottled water. It was the safest I had felt in weeks. I stayed offline for several days, avoiding anything that could reveal my location. I knew he would look for me. I didn't know how long it would take him to realize I was gone, but I assumed not long. I kept waiting for a message, a phone call, anything. But nothing came. That was even more unnerving than if he had begged me to return. Eventually, I contacted a lawyer and explained the situation. I showed them the footage I had saved to a drive, the receipts for the VR headset, the stills of the cameras I had found. They were horrified. They helped me file a report and advised me on how to protect myself legally. They told me I had a solid case. Weeks passed without any word from him. I assumed he had either gone underground or was biding his time. I stayed alert but slowly started rebuilding my routine. I found a remote job again, started journaling, and began therapy. The nightmares lessened over time, though they never truly disappeared. Sometimes, I'd still wake up expecting a lens to be watching me from the shadows. Months later, I got a call from the authorities. They had executed a search warrant and found surveillance equipment throughout the house, just as I described. The recordings were still on his hard drive. He hadn't even tried to delete them. He was taken into custody and charged. I was asked if I wanted to testify. I said yes. The courtroom felt cold and clinical, but I was calm. I told the truth without dramatics. I explained how I had trusted him, how he had violated that trust in a way that made me question everything about my reality. He sat quietly the entire time, not looking at me once. When the verdict was read, I felt a knot loosen in my chest. Afterward, I walked out into the sunlight and took a deep breath. I was finally free of him. Free of the lens. Free of the fear that every quiet moment in my home was being recorded. I went back to my apartment and took a long shower. For the first time in ages, I didn't glance at the ceiling once. It took a long time to feel normal again. I moved to a new city, changed my number, and started fresh. I built new routines, found new friends, and eventually started dating again. But I never forgot what happened. I used it as a reminder to trust my instincts and set boundaries I would never let anyone cross again. Now, when someone asks why I don't have a VR headset or smart devices in my home, I smile politely and change the subject. They don't need to know the details. It's enough that I survived, that I walked away before he could trap me completely, that I found my voice and used it, and most of all, that I never went back. Story 12. It began like any ordinary conversation, harmless and casual. We were talking about fitness routines, and I had mentioned that I took early morning runs a few times a week. She seemed genuinely interested, asked about the route, and I figured there was no harm in sharing. When she asked for my exact GPS coordinates, it felt a little over the top, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was planning to map out her own runs, I thought. That morning, I laced up my shoes at 5 a.m. like I always did. The trail I usually followed wrapped around a wooded park, quiet and cool before the sun came up. There were barely any cars out, just birds waking up and the soft rustle of leaves under my feet. I liked the solitude. It gave me space to think and unwind before the day began. About halfway through my loop, I noticed someone running ahead of me, maybe 30 feet or so. They had the same pace, same rhythmic strides, and a ponytail that bounced with every step. As I got closer, I realized it was her. She turned her head just slightly and smiled in surprise. Or what she pretended was surprise. She said she had no idea I ran this early. that she just happened to be in the area and wanted to try a new trail. I laughed politely, but inside I felt a flicker of unease. It was hard to believe she had ended up at the exact point on my route without using the coordinates I had given her. Still, I let it go. Coincidences happen. We jogged together for a while and I tried to act normal, even as the back of my neck tingled. She kept glancing at me, asking little questions about how often I run, what time I start, whether I run the same route every time. The conversation felt less like small talk and more like data collection. I told myself I was overthinking. After the run, she waved goodbye and jogged off in the opposite direction. I stayed behind and watched her disappear around the bend. Something about her stride looked wrong now, forced, like the entire run had been an act. I stood there for a while, breathing heavily, trying to shake off the discomfort. The next day, I changed my route and started 20 minutes earlier. I figured if it really was a coincidence, she would not show up again. But when I reached the halfway point of the new trail, she was there, stretching by the water fountain. She acted surprised again and said she thought it might be fun to try a different park. My stomach dropped. She was clearly tracking me. There was no other explanation. She asked if I wanted to run together again. I lied.